Welcome to Good Burger Reviews. I'm here to review a brand new 2026 movie, and that movie is The Confession.
Something's not right.
Things have been happening in this house. Dylan is acting strange. Dee?
Mom?
Dead animals started showing up all around our property.
It's you!
This movie was released to Prime in March of 2026. It is directed by Will Cannon. It stars Italia Ricci, Zach Gollinger, Scott Melkowitz, Justin Smith, and Allie McCaw. The basic premise: a musician returns to her childhood home and finds that her late father's recorded murder's confession, made to ward off an evil force. As her son's behavior grows disturbing, she fights to the end of the darkness. This movie is definitely one of those ones that's a movie blend, along with a little something else, a well-known child story or legend. And when I think of what blends into The Confession, I think of The Poltergeist or Insidious meets The Exorcist Believer meets The Pied Piper. And isn't that a strange blend? But this movie definitely has been inspired by those stories, and lots of other horror movies as well find moments in here. A little bit of Back to the Future, a little bit of The Babadook, even a little bit of Caddo Lake, and The Conjuring. So there's some interesting plot points in this movie. So with no further ado, let's get into the good, the bad, and the ugly on The Confession. So in the positives, I'll say it starts off with all the traditional spooks, haunts, bump in the nights, demons running around, cryptic people telling stories, little boys that are acting terrified, grieving women who have lost their spouse and father, has all that going on. And it takes a lot of familiar stories that we've seen before. And I primarily think of like the Poltergeist or the Insidious movies, because it's definitely about people who are being haunted by a ghost. But there's a little bit of extra twists and turns on this.
You son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones! Why? Why?
Another thing that I'll put in the positive is this reminded me of a movie I reviewed already, which was also on Prime, The Ruse, where I said the setting was like a seaside town or a lakeside town, and it was very rural, very creepy. You had lots of strange people running around doing strange things and acting bizarre in parking lots, which added to the creep factor of this movie. Another thing that I'll add to the positive is this movie was trying to be a religious movie. After all, the title of it is The Confession, and it starts off with a young girl who is a single mother who listens to a tape recorded by her father multiple years back, where he's confessed to murdering someone, but for good reasons, trying to prevent some sort of entity or evil force from taking over him, his family, and his town.
This is Arthur Riley, pastor of Mount Calvary Church. If you found this, it means the rats are back. If they are, beware.
So where does The Exorcist Believer fit into this mix? Well, our young boy Dylan, who ends up, after the demon's been poking around the house and spooking him and his mom for a while, all of a sudden, Dylan and his friend disappear. And that immediately reminded me of The Exorcist Believer, where the two young girls in The Exorcist Believer disappear for 3 days before they are returned possessed. And the way the town and the police and the parents grouped together and they started searching for the kids while they were missing reminded me of the whole front end of The Exorcist Believer, which I actually enjoyed the front end of The Exorcist Believer more than the back end. And this part where they're looking for the kid and knowing that he might have been kidnapped by a demon reminds me of The Exorcist Believer.
Tell your dad how long you were gone?
A few hours?
Baby, you've been gone 3 days.
Which leads me to my next thought. We've had a lot of movies this year where we're blending like serial killer movies with slashers. And we just watched Traumatica, where was it a slasher movie or was it a demon movie? And this movie was giving me that vibe too. Was this a ghost movie, or was it our milkman or good humor man kind of acted like a slasher in the end?
Don't. You'll only make it worse.
As a parent, you have one job.
And this will bring me to the mixed. And I will say in this part that the mixed is the ending. And I will elaborate on what I'm mixed about in spoilers, because mostly what I'm mixed on is spoilerific. But we're going to go ahead and get into the negatives before I do spoilers, because most of my negatives can be spoiler-free comments. So in the negatives, the first thing I think of is this movie is guilty of things that I've griped on before. When I think of, and I just said this about Minnie's Midnight Massacre, where I felt like the people who were behind that just saw a bunch of scary movies and decided to make an imitation in the public domain fashion. Now, this movie I felt like was similar, where the people behind it, they clearly are fans of movies like Insidious and Poltergeist and those franchises, The Exorcist, The Conjuring, and all of them. But the question is did they do it as good as that? Or is it kind of the dollar store version of Insidious?
I said, what do you want? It said Dalton. I can still hear that voice.
And another thing that I'll put in the negatives is something that I always gripe about when I see this in movies, is when they have dream sequences that are just there for a jump scare or a scary moment, but they really have nothing to do with the story other than to add an added spooky scene without progressing the plot, without adding anything to the story, telling us anything more about the demon or more about the character. And in this movie is guilty of that, where our main girl definitely has a dream sequence. So I can be a little bit of forgiving for it, because it seems like there's only one dream sequence towards the beginning. And another thing that I'll put in the negatives, and probably the last thing that I'll put in the negatives, is it's very typical with the character. You always seem, I griped about this a lot last year, where we had a bunch of movies where it was a single parent that was grieving who had a kid. And, it seems like that trope can get overdone. Now here, they definitely lean into the whole grieving thing and the whole single parent thing, and that's kind of what was reminding me of the Babadook. Our main girl kind of definitely had a Babadook feel to her. The way she was relating to her child, the way she struggled with the child was acting bizarre in scenes and reacting to the entity in this movie in strange ways, and just that she couldn't handle it.
All children see monsters.
Not like these.
You can't get rid of the Babadook.
You can bring me the boy.
And before we get into spoilers, I will say overall, this movie is worth a watch if you like supernatural mysteries, thrillers with twists in the plots and stuff like that. This movie would be right up your alley. Overall, it did give me a basic feel, and there are some pacing issues throughout the second and third act, but like I said, if you like those types of stories, then this one's right up your alley. So I recommend checking it out on Prime. We're going to get into some spoilers right now, and I'll put a timestamp for the rating. So this movie starts off with Naomi, and she is a struggling musician. She's a single parent. She's lost her husband fairly recently, and she lost her father at least a decade back. And she's raising a young boy, Dylan, and he's probably 9 or 10 years old. He's a little odd, a little creepy, the perfect kid that you put in a movie like this. Definitely reminds me of the young boy that starred in Insidious back in 2010. And they have just moved back into her father, his grandfather's home. And as soon as they move in, spooky things start happening. She notices him in like the bedroom, turning off the light switch, staring into the space, scared of his closet, asking her to check under the bed and things like that. He does another bizarre thing where he cuts off an animal head and brings it to school, so the school is calling her. And it does a really good job with setting the stage of how creepy this movie is going to be, or where you kind of know it's going. Because this movie overall it kind of could have wrote itself, or you could have wrote it out, knowing if you're a horror movie advocate and you love watching these types of movies, you kind of know where it's going. It's predictable.
There's another child that went missing earlier today, Nathan Hudson.
Let's look at the original story of the Pied Piper. The kids were let out of town, just like the rats.
Don't. You'll only make it worse.
So Naomi finds this tape that was left there by her father, and on the tape is a confession. He confesses to murdering someone, and that it was for the good of him and for the good of future generations. And that he's buried the body somewhere and it should be easy to find if needed. So she reaches out to her friend Grayson, who she's probably known for a while, and they've reunited after she's moved back from California, which is mentioned multiple times. And this movie, for some reason, is hating on California. Don't know why. But this little small town, the people there think California is like for the devil. Meanwhile, their town is being taken over by its own little devil. And this devil, or this entity, is where I get the Pied Piper vibe. There's so many little references to the Pied Piper. Like in one scene, the mother says to the little boy, "If you get scared and you can't get me, you can blow on this whistle," and that reminded me of the Pied Piper. Also, there's lots of rats in this movie. Rats in the attic, rats in the basement, and rats are definitely in the finale. So that was another thing that was reminding me of the Pied Piper.
Okay, rats, you go to work. Oh, wait. Listen. I tell you what is. He's no work. He's dancing. He's cheese. His big shoes. Okay? All right, rats, you go to work.
And the entity, or the demon, or the evil person in this movie, played by Justin Smith, is also named Piper. So it's kind of like this Pied Piper haunting mystery. So the Piper, there's a backstory where we get, like, what do they call that? An exposition dump where she calls on a character that knew her father, this cryptic pastor guy that is like, knows the whole backstory of the town and everything that went down, and knows about the Piper. So apparently the Piper lost his land and had to move, and this lake was going to destroy his property, and he didn't like it, so he ended up kidnapping 5 boys for every acre that he lost, and 2 of the 5 boys escaped, and one of them is her father, and another one was the person he killed. The other 3 were killed by the Piper. The Piper then proceeds to haunt the father, and I guess his name was Roy, the 2 boys that escaped, and this was back in the 1950s. And I found it comical when they referenced the 1950s. They had this old black and white television and a bunch of, the only other thing that, besides this newspaper, was there was a ton of traditional old school milk bottles, which I was chuckling at that. And then he was a milkman too. So, I mean, that reminded me of the 50s, but then I guess he was a milkman, because at the end when we see him in full character, he's wearing a white milk, like the whole white milkman outfit, which was odd because that reminded me of a milkman massacre that happened where I live about 20 years ago. I said I would bring up the mix in the spoiler section because I'm mixed about the way the movie ends. So after all the traditional Poltergeist meets Insidious front end of this movie, we then have the priest character show up, the friend of the father, who is somewhat like Zelda, but somewhat like the priest from Sinister, or the dude in Sinister, like the dude that gives the expo dump in Sinister. And he was very odd to me because like he comes and he's like, I'm a priest, I love Jesus, you need the Lord as your savior and all that. But then he's like, he hates the church. So he's like this independent pastorish, whatever. I don't know how you're a pastor with no church. But anyhow, I digress. His character was interesting because I liked the way he acted sometimes, but then he was bizarre because like when he first arrives at the house, it's like he's tapping on walls and he's shaking his body and shaking his leg. I'm like, oh my God, if I had this guy to my house, I'd be like instant fake. You just put Ed and Lorraine Warren to shame.
Hi, I'm Roger.
Lorraine.
Hey, nice to meet you, Roger. Ed Warren. Thanks for coming.
Please come in. Thank you.
Well, that's to keep those doors from banging at night. Otherwise, it's like all night long, just like that. Does it come in threes? Yeah. Stops at dawn? Uh-huh. Well, sometimes it's meant as an insult to the Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
But he does get the job done. I mean, he does know everything about the demon, he knows everything about the Piper, and he knows how to defeat it. But the way and this is what mixes me about this movie, the ending. So, like, the way they defeat the demon is like they have this Insidious meets Back to the Future moment. And how does that happen? Well, he says, because our main girl has been struggling with her faith, and she doesn't believe, even though she was raised in the faith. Her father was a believer. He was also a priest. As well. And her friend Grayson is also a believer. So they're like, she needs to believe for this whole thing to work. So the pastor's going to take her to the lake and he says, yeah, you need to be baptized, but not just, little trinkets of water on your head. You need to be full blown submerged in the lake where this entity came from, by the way. And she gets baptized, which I thought was kind of funny. She gets baptized like in the middle of the night under a full moon. So that was kind of actually a haunting little scene. But the minute she gets put under the water, it's like she transfers back to the 1950s where this whole thing started to unravel. And it's like kind of reminded me of Back to the Future, but also a movie I really liked back in 24 called Caddo Lake, where they were time jumping to affect things and in water as well. So, like, she transports during her baptism back to the 1950s, and then it's like the 1950s is kind of like the other side or the further because it's cryptic, it's weird, it's haunting. This creepy milkman's walking around, terrorizing the town, like kidnapping these kids and stuff, and he has them kidnapped. But she manages to get to where he's at, and she's trying to rescue her son. Because somehow throughout their possession in the front end of the movie, this entity Piper had kidnapped him and brought him back to the 1950s. Not sure why. They never really elaborate on the whole time travel thing. She ends up getting into his house, and it was funny. There was all these little setups in the beginning of the movie. Like she would hold her breath with the little kid, and then, the whole thing with the mice and everything and the rats. So, like, all these little things are kind of coming back at the end of the movie as well. And, again, like I said, it was predictable. So she ends up conquering this guy after he attacks her multiple times, like attacks her inside, attacks her in water. But she ends up being triumphant, or so we think. She ends up being triumphant initially because, like, she ends up getting her kid, rescuing, saving the day, comes back to regular time. It seems to be a happy ending. But there was this cryptic thing that the guy said about, and I'm not going to get it word for word, but it was like something about parents raising children, and what's more sad is if the children are raised without their parents, or if the parents are gone. And when he first said it, I thought nothing of it. It's just that it was a cryptic thing, but then it came back in the end. Where all of a sudden we think it's an ending, but I guess maybe it was like a little fake ending because it was like the happy ending, but then he says that line again about children being raised without parents, and then all of a sudden all the parents in this town are marching into the river, marching into the water, kind of like the way the Pied Piper led away the children. This time he's leading away the parents. So I guess that's kind of the twist. So all the parents are walking out, and the main kid in this movie is just standing there watching them all leave. So I mean, it was kind of a quirky ending, but overall, I felt like the movie was decent. I enjoyed it because these supernatural ones are right up my alley. Even if they are basic, even if they are generic, and the acting it was subpar, but I think I could get into this one. I did enjoy it overall. So we're gonna get down to business on The Confession. So this one was decent enough for me because it was right up my alley. I felt like it's very much a basic burger. Considering the fact that it kind of plays on most movies that we've seen before that have done it better before, but it's a good one-time watch. So I do recommend it if you have Prime. They don't charge you to watch it. It comes with Prime. Go ahead and give this one a watch and tell me what you think in the comments. And please, like, subscribe, tap that notification bell, and don't forget to stay scared of milkmen entities that kidnap kids and adults and rats in the whole world and terrorize a little small town on the lake.
Scared to move, hey babe, or are you trying to prove it ain't true that your life